This video is going to look at monk levels 7 through 12. If you do want to have a look at the levels of 1 to 6, please look at a previous video I already made. At the moment, this monk is where the 4 elements, which is why it says replace spell. At level 7, as with all levels, we always get one additional key point. As a reminder, the maximum number of key points is equal to our level +1. Evasion, this is very good. This has saved me quite a few times. So when a spell or effect would deal half damage on a successful dexterity saving throw, it deals no damage if you succeed. Now, monks generally have a very high dexterity saving throw. So this means very often, if there is a dexterity based attack coming at you, where you have to make a dexterity saving throw, you're going to receive no damage. Stillness of mind, this is... Oh, I haven't seen this come up too much. If you're charmed or frightened, you automatically cast Stillness of Mind to remove the condition. Just haven't really been charmed or frightened all that often, I've found. But it's nice to have. When it works, it is great. At level 8, all characters get to have a new feat. I will quickly go over the feats again. I'm making this video after a lot more experience with the monk now. So Athlete is always going to be great. Dual Wielder, this can potentially be very good. It depends if you've got some weapons that you actually want to have the effects of. Having the weapon in the offhand, we don't want it for the offhand attack. Generally, because we've got our unarmed strikes, we're going to be using Flurry of Blows. But if you find a weapon that you really like the effects of, like there's a quarterstaff that gives you counterspell, level 5, once per either short or long rest. And so if you want your monk to be able to do that, then put it on. Also, it gives you 1 extra armor class, so it kind of helps a bit. But if you don't have any weapons in mind, then don't take Dual Wielder. There's sometimes I wish I had Durable for the short rest, getting all the hit points back. Monks do take a fair bit of damage. Lucky is going to be good for every single character. I did try out Mage Slayer. I wouldn't really advise it. The number of times where these features actually came up was very limited. When enemies cast spells, they're rarely saving throws against you when you're standing right next to them. Quite often they do walk away from you anyway. I had this come up a couple of times, so it's nice, but I don't think it's really worth a feat. Mobile is going to be great. I did try out Polearm Master. Quite often my monk had either a quarterstaff or a spear. So this means you can make an opportunity attack when a target comes within range. Currently bugged. When I was jumping near enemies, a pop-up would come up saying, "Ooh, an enemy's come within range." If I click on it, the enemy attacked me. Maybe that bug will be changed later after this video has been released, but at the making of this video, that's currently bugged. And in this Polearm Master bonus attack is pointless for monks because we always have our unarmed attacks anyway, and they do more than 1d4 bludgeoning damage. So currently I would avoid Polearm Master in all honesty. Resilient is going to be good if you want to get your wisdom up, and you want to have it up to a even number especially, but proficiency in wisdom saving throws is good for every character. Sentinel, I picked Sentinel, and it's kind of nice to have, so in case you didn't know what it does, you can use your reaction to make an attack against an enemy if that enemy makes attack against an ally. And I had this come up a few times, but you do have to position your monk correctly. When you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, it can no longer move for the rest of its turn. That's pretty cool, because generally they're moving past your monk because they don't want to target your monk, but then you almost effectively force them to, and you have advantage on opportunity attacks. Who doesn't want that? Generally with monks, you're probably not going to be using your ranged weapons very much, so sharpshooter isn't that great. Tavern Brawler can be amazing if you've built a strength monk here. I don't have a strength monk, but I can show you later. Maybe tough. Generally I would put constitution up by 2. It doesn't give you as many hit points, but it does give you the extra +1 bonus to constitution saving throws, which monks are not proficient in. And Weapon Master, this can be really, really good to help you get proficiency with a weapon, which then lets you use it as a monk weapon. And so if you've found a battle axe you really like, for example, and you haven't got a dwarf monk, then you can choose this. Although I would kind of say that when you get to level 12, if you've picked the Weapon Master feat, it's probably worth respecing and putting 1 level in Fighter, because you get proficiency with all martial weapons anyway. But this does give you an extra ability score, so if you've got an odd number, this really, really helps. Anyway, for this monk, let's just say mobile for now. So at level 9, we do get a new subclass feature. Now, for where the 4 elements, it says several of your offensive 4 element features deal an additional dice of damage. That's nice. Your Clench of the North Winds can hold an additional creature, and your Embrace of the Inferno fires an extra ray. Clench of the North Wind is like Hold Person, and Embrace of the Inferno is just Scorching Ray pretty much. We also have unarmored movement, so now you can jump an additional 20 feet while you're not wearing armor or using a shield. It's massive. Monks can jump so far, and with Step of the Wind, Disengage or Dash, you can get around any battlefields in a single turn pretty much. And we get a new spell, but it's still the same set of spells as before. You might have seen that every level for where the 4 elements have been having replace spell, where we can change an old spell for a new one. So I don't know, Embrace the Inferno because I've got the extra ray now. And at this point, I will show you the subclass features for the other subclasses now. At level 9, Way of the Shadow does not get any extra feature, it just gets the usual key and advanced unarmored movement. And at level 9, Way of the Open Hand gets this thing called Key Resonance. So you can use your action or bonus action to hit an enemy, basically tag an enemy, and then once you've tagged as many enemies as you want, which could just be one, bear in mind these punches do not actually require a key point. It's just when you use the blast, Key Resonance Blast ability that the key point gets used, and then all the enemies that have been tagged within that 17-foot area of a single enemy, they take 3d6 force damage, and they also do the damage to each other. So if you've got a lot of enemies, especially slightly weaker enemies, go around, tag them all, and then use this Key Resonance Blast, and you do a nice amount of AoE damage. Also, the blast doesn't take an action or bonus action, it just requires a key point. So you can just spend a single turn using 2 attacks to tag 2 enemies, and then your bonus action to tag a third. You can't use this with Flurry of Blows, but with Flurry of Blows we can only target a single enemy anyway. Or you could wait a couple of turns. But in all likelihood, if you've waited a couple of turns, the enemy's going to die anyway. So when I've used this, I've often just used the blast on the same turn that I've tagged 1, 2, or 3 enemies. At level 10 we get another key point, more unarmored movement, so our movement speed is now increased by 20 feet, and then Purity of Body, you are immune to poison damage and can't be poisoned. This is actually really nice. It's kind of a ribbon ability, we sometimes call it, but some of the traps actually create kind of poison clouds, and my monk can just walk straight through them. Doesn't care. Absolutely no worries whatsoever. It's probably most useful in that situation where there have been poison traps, but when it happens it's great, and means you're immune to poison damage, which some enemies do, not a huge amount. I think it happens more earlier in the game than later in the game, but yeah, it's kind of nice to have. Then at level 11, the Way of the Open Hands, we get Tranquility. So basically you get Sanctuary after a long rest, which means you can't be targeted by enemies or spells, but the condition ends if you attack someone or harm another creature. This is good for walking around. I've not made much use of it. It's nice to have, but it's not like a build-defining ability anyway. At level 11, Way of the Four Elements gets a new spell, and we get access to 3 new spells. We get Flames of the Phoenix, Fireball pretty much, Mist Dance, which is Gaseous Form, and Ride of the Wind, which is Fly. But there's a big difference here for monks in the Fly, is this lasts until long rest, and that's really quite good. Whereas the Fly spell, which is level 3 spell, it's only 10 turns. Whereas this is permanent, so this is really good for exploring. Same thing for Gaseous Form, except this time you can get into small openings in places, so it's even better for exploring in a way. And then Fireball, Fireball's Fireball, it's good. But I would say, by the time we get this at level 11, a lot of the enemies have quite a high number of hit points. One thing I'm a bit sad of is that the Replace spell at level 11, we can't actually switch one of the current spells, let's just say Gong of the Summit, for one of the new spells we can currently learn. At level 12 you can replace one of your currently known spells with a new one. I would kind of advise that, these are very strong. I would definitely go for Flames of the Phoenix. Probably Fly, just so you can still speak to people. And then Way of the Shadow at level 11, get this ability called Shadow Strike, which can either be with a weapon or unarmed. Teleport to a foe from a hidden position, striking them with the creeping psychic ferocity of the shadows themselves. Right, so this takes 3 key points. Quite a bit, and deals an extra 3d8 psychic damage, which is nice. One thing I've found though is that you have to do it from a hidden position, so you have to be hidden already. What you can do as Way of the Shadow though is you have Hide as a bonus action, so then you can teleport using Shadow Strike, but then doing that you're not using a Flurry of Blows, but 3d8 psychic damage is pretty good, and you do get to teleport 30 feet. So yeah, it's a nice way of doing extra damage. And then at level 12 we get another feat, just like every other class, and an extra key point. One thing I forgot to say earlier is for the ability improvement, of course we can take that, it's always a good idea. Dexterity up to 20, Wisdom up to 18 perhaps. I've currently got an item that increases my dexterity by +2 to a maximum of 20, which is why I don't have it up to 20 here, but I would say it's always going to be a good choice, very good choice. In terms of leveling up, there's one more thing I want to talk about, which is multiclassing. Now, I can't go through every single possible combination because there are far too many combinations. What I'm going to talk about in this video is just a 1 level dip in another class. And the reason I think that's mostly as far as you should go is that monks really have their own unique resource, being ki, and you will run out of ki very quickly if you don't have a high enough level. And we do get lots of extra abilities as we level up. For example, the Way of the Open Hand gets their Resonance Key ability at level 9. And honestly, that's such a strong ability that I would say you should definitely get to level 9 as one example. Now, the problem with 1 level dips is that with a lot of these classes, they use different resources, such as maybe spell slots or rage charges, which don't overlap. One benefit, though, of 1 level dips is that lots of classes are what we call front loaded, so they get loads of abilities at level 1. Now barbarians, if you were going for more than one level, this would be better. Rage is fine, it's good, it gives you resistance to melee damage, but we only get one rage charge per long rest, and if you're just doing a single level dip, I'd say it's personally not really worth it. The other downside is that the rage charge uses a bonus action, and monks have a lot to do with their bonus action already. For the spellcasting classes, I would generally avoid them, but it's not that they're a completely bad idea. They do give you lots of extra versatility, so if you want some cantrips, my monk here, this charisma is awful, has proficiency in almost no charisma skills apart from intimidation. So maybe, actually, friends would be a nice cantrip to have. Maybe blade wards, unlikely. And if you're going, and when you're going to pick spells for a spellcasting class, personally, I would advise one of two things. Either you pick spells that are rituals, such as Featherfall and Longstrider, so they don't actually take up a spell slot anyway. And the second thing, which these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, is you pick spells that do not require any sort of saving throw. For example, a bard uses charisma as their spellcasting modifier, so pick spells that don't use a spellcasting modifier. A lot of these do happen to be ritual spells actually, and I would always say that healing word is a good idea, having ranged healing as a bonus action. Anyway, I wouldn't generally pick bard because bards have charisma as the spellcasting modifier. It's not very likely you're going to have a very high charisma as a monk, but you do get your bardic inspiration if you want that. Clerics are quite interesting because they use wisdom as the spellcasting modifier, and generally as a monk you've probably got at least a 14 in wisdom. Now in terms of which domain to pick, if you are going for a monk who does wear armor, you may as well get heavy armor proficiency, in which case the life domain is a good choice. I'll go through some of the others. The light domain is a good choice because we get this warding flare which gives disadvantage to attackers. I would avoid these. Basically next good one I would say is, well, unless you just want heavy armor proficiency and you want a druid cantrip, that can be okay, I guess, actually, because you have wisdom as a spellcasting modifier. As for which cantrip you pick, I would not pick Shillelagh. I've had a few people say to me, like, oh look, CVG, you are using a quarterstaff as a monk. Surely Shillelagh is going to be good. Well, all it does is adds your spellcasting ability for your attack rolls and the damage rolls, but your dexterity is very likely to be higher anyway, or your strength, in which case it doesn't do anything for you. I would say though that resistance and guidance are good choices for out of combat utility. I mean, maybe produce flame. The others aren't so great. I mean, Thorn Whip, actually, sorry. I'd pick Thorn Whip out of these. Anyway, Tempest Domain is really good because not only do we get proficiency with heavy armor, but also martial weapons. And we get this, so you strike back at an attacking creature. Basically, you get to do some retaliatory damage, in which case, you know, doing extra lightning damage or thunder damage. You also have the War Domain, which gives the same proficiencies as Tempest. And for anything other than a monk, this War Priest would be really good. You can spend a War Priest charge to make an additional attack as a bonus action, but as a monk, we've got unarmed attacks as bonus actions anyway, so I would actually avoid War Domain. I'd probably go Light or Tempest. The spells that are good from the Cleric spell list, Bless is always a very good choice. Healing Word, as I mentioned earlier, for bards. And you get to choose and switch these around anyway. And maybe Command. I do like commands. By the time we get to late game, I don't know if the wisdom's going to be quite high enough. But the downside, the massive downside, is that a lot of these spells do use an action. And using an action means you're not using your melee attacks. And very importantly, you're not using your stunning strike as a monk. Druids, pretty much what I said for clerics applies to druids for a 1-level dip. But they do get some different spells. So Longstrider and Enhanced Sleep are going to be good choices. And again, Healing Word and whichever other one you want. Speak with Animals, another ritual spell. Fighter. As a monk, none of these generally help all that much. I can see maybe dueling if you are wielding, let's say, a rapier or perhaps a short sword. Dueling would probably be the best idea. Most monks don't wear armor, so that's not going to be useful. Perhaps archery, but again, most of the time you're probably going to be using melee attacks. Great weapon fighting, I would avoid because you cannot use dexterity with a two-handed weapon as a monk. Protection, you probably don't have a shield. Two-weapon fighting is fairly pointless because you can just use your unarmed attack anyway. These don't mesh particularly well. I will add though that any class with 2 levels of fighter is always great because action surge is great. Paladin, this is actually kind of good in a way because we get this lay on hands. Like the amount of healing you can do is linked to your character level, not just the individual class level. And so you get massive amounts of healing just for a 1-level dip in Paladin. Also, we do get proficiency with all weapons, light armor, medium armor, and shields. As for your devotion, if we're just going for 1 level, I'd probably go with Oath of the Ancients, just to get a bit of bonus action healing and an AoE. Maybe Oath of Vengeance. You and your allies, weapon attacks, and not your unarmed attacks, deal an additional radiant damage and can daze enemies. Dazed enemies generally have a lower armor class because their dexterity bonus gets taken away. They have disadvantage on wisdom saving throws. and they can't take reactions. Daze is a very strong effect. Rangers are kind of nice because on their first level they get quite a lot of choices, and we also do get proficiency in simple weapons, not martial weapons, light armors, medium armor, and shield. And then you get to pick something that gives you 1 extra proficiency and another ability. Pick whichever one you want, but it's a nice way to get extra proficiencies. And a natural explorer, beast tamer is actually quite good, even at the high levels. Just having an extra body on the field is really, really nice. Or you can get some resistance to damage if you want that, and you get to pick 1 extra skill proficiency out of a limited number, but it's still quite nice. The rogue for single level, it's not worth it for the rogue. The rogue doesn't really give you anything. If you're using a finesse weapon, I guess actually, you know, sneak attack is fine. It's an extra 1d6 damage. But aside from that, you're not really gaining very much apart from expertise into skills. Sorcerer, as I mentioned with other spellcasting classes, there's not much overlap, especially with charisma as the casting stat. But some spells don't require charisma. So shield will be very nice for any melee character, but you can only do it twice per day. It's not very much, is it? And then maybe enhanced leap. Cantrips, you pick whatever cantrips you want, but the spellcasting modifier will be charisma, so you probably don't want to pick any attacking cantrips. As for subclass, I mean, Draconic's fine, because you do get an extra hit point. This base armor class 13 doesn't stack with an armor defense, so it doesn't help that much. Storm Sorcery, so after you cast level 1 spell or higher, you can fly as a bonus action. That's probably not that useful. You're not going to be casting that many level 1 spells. Sure, you can do it as a ritual, so actually it can help with exploration. I wouldn't generally recommend Sorcerer though, just because there isn't much overlap. Similar thing goes for the Warlock. I wouldn't generally recommend it. Sure, maybe we can get extra temporary hit points. They're not going to last very long. A 1 level dip isn't going to do much for you with the Warlock, unless you want access to one of these cantrips, perhaps. The Wizard's a bit different. Wizard's always going to be a good 1 level dip. In fact, this is the one I'll actually use. We get a few cantrips. Let's say Friends, perhaps. Ooh, I like Acid Splash because you can open up lots of vases and boxes. Destroy lots of vases and boxes when you're exploring, and Blade Wall, whatever. Now your spells. Wizards have a lot of ritual spells on their spell list. The main downside here is, especially with my intelligence at 8, I can only actually prepare 1 wizard spell at a time. It's a bit sad. I just also want to point out the mage armor spell doesn't stack with your wisdom modifier and dexterity modifier. No point in picking it for a monk. Well, if your wisdom is less than 16, actually there is a point in picking it. If it's 16 or higher, there's no point. So as a level 1 wizard, we can learn scribe any scrolls we've got, and you know, I'm towards the end of the game here. I've picked up lots of scrolls I haven't used yet, so I can make my character learn all of these spells that we can cast at level 1. And now I've got access to loads of spells, but again, only 1 at a time. Though I will point out that Find Familiar, we can cast it as a ritual, so I'm not going to use up any spell slots. And then forget it and then put something else on. Here it's about the versatility, but at the end of the day, this isn't absolutely amazing as with just 1 level in wizard and with a monk, because we haven't got any spell slots from being a monk, so we're limited to 2 spell slots. I will give a special mention to the monk rogue multiclass. It's got 3 levels in rogue and the thief subclass because it gives us an extra bonus action, which means we can use flurry of blows twice in every turn. Obviously it requires an extra key point, and every time we multiclass we do have to think about the opportunity cost. So what have I lost here? I've lost a feat, I've lost some extra monk points, and I've lost the abilities we get at level 10 and level 11. So it's not like it's come without any sort of cost. However, I think this is really quite good. Let's attack Karnak. And we just did 30 damage with our first attack. Let's now use Tadpole. Ignore that. Critical hit, obviously. Very lucky. Have another attack. Don't need the critical hit. And we're doing fairly decent damage. It's not necessarily the highest damage in the world, but we have the possibility of inflicting quite a lot of damage. So how do we do this? A lot of these items are from towards the end of the game. Not all of them, but some of them. For example, the Helldusk armor and the gloves of soul catching actually come from the same place effectively. So this is some very special armor that could go on any character. It's heavy armor, but you're considered proficient with it while you're wearing it, even if you don't have proficiency in heavy armor. So you get a set armor class of 21. We're able to cast fly as a bonus action. When you succeed a saving throw, basically you've got some sort of retaliation, resistance to fire damage, take 3 less damage, that's awesome. And then gloves of soul catching, your unarmed attacks deal an additional 1d10, 1 to 10 force damage. Constitution +2. There are some other benefits, but the point here is about the damage. This here, the wearer deals additional damage equal to the wisdom modifier with unarmed strikes. So it's an extra +3 bonus, which is where this experience in deadly comes from. These other items don't affect the damage. So like I said, these gloves come from towards the end of the game. There are plenty of other gloves found throughout the game that give you an extra 1d4 necrotic damage. For example, this one gives 1d4 force damage, but needless to say, there are plenty of gloves that actually boost your unarmed strikes. Now, the opportunity cost here of using this sort of tavern brawler, because this is a tavern brawler, which is why the strength is at 20. One of the downsides of this is you don't have a weapon, which means you can't get any special abilities from magical weapons. I forgot to turn this on. That was very silly of me, so I have to go find another victim. Alright, Minsk. Let's try this again. There we are, that's what we're looking for. Right, as a way of the open hand monk, we get to roll an extra 1d4 plus wisdom modifier of either radiant, psychic, or necrotic damage. And so now, just with the average attack, we're dealing, well, somewhere between 20 and 30 damage per attack. And as a thief, we can actually have 6 attacks per round. Obviously, that starts using up your key points. Keep that in mind, but that's super, super strong. So let's see what we can do to Will. Now, this pop-up is to do with one of the Tadpole Powers, which I'll explain in a second. I mean, in 2 hits there, I've taken Will from 87 down to 29 hit points. I just did 58 damage with 1 bonus action and 1 key point to a single target. That's really damn strong. There aren't many other classes that can do that to a single target for a bonus action. But now we come to the ultimate part to this build. Wholeness of body. Again, only with Wear of the Open Hand. 3 bonus actions. So I can get 6 attacks out.
Did you do that on purpose?
Yes, I did. So we can see here, pretty deadly. But it is using up key points quite quickly. But is almost certainly going to be worth it. What I've also given up is movement speed. The other nice thing about this build is that the jump distance is still pretty good. 52 feet. I haven't picked athlete for this. If I'd picked athlete, this would be even higher. One alternative to this build is actually using some of the gauntlets that give you a strength of 23 instead. Therefore, you could put your dexterity very high, but you don't get these gauntlets until towards the end of the game in Act 3. So I wouldn't advise building everything around it, just respec at the right time. So I want to show you how monks kind of work in battle, how their kind of style. Now, they are melee characters in general. Obviously, where the 4 elements can have some spells that are ranged, and we can wield things like short bows, but most of our abilities are for melee attacks. So I've got, for example, here, this is Way of the Shadow Monk. What I'm going to do is hide with a bonus action. Now, this can be done in combat, and we'll start a combat very soon. And let's say we want to use Shadow Strike, and then I can target. Let's say this dude's obviously going to be the main guy here. So they're pretty much all surprised. I'm just going to let them have their turn. I don't want to start every battle. And you don't start every battle surprising the enemy. It's completely impossible, because some of them are just set to work out. Now we can see here we've got a lot of enemies. Now, monks generally aren't good at taking out lots of enemies. There are ways to do it. Where the open hand has a way. I'll show you the way the open hand later. But what monks' main purpose, aside from just dealing damage, honestly, is stunning strike. So we get 2 of these per turn from level 5 onwards. So now this character, the wizard, will not do anything on his turn. Completely taken out of the turn order effectively. What I would then suggest in situations such as this is probably, like, these dudes look a little bit dangerous as well. Try and take another one out. The good thing here is we're on Greece. My dexterity saving throws are through the roof, plus 11. And we've got advantage. I'll show you why in a second. So if we can't actually kill an enemy, we try and stun them. Again, that didn't work out. That's okay. We're doing our best. Now, as we're the shadow, perhaps you would want to get out of there, and you can shadow step away. But we've also got the option just to start pounding away on an enemy and get laser. Also, a good idea is if you've stunned an enemy, you've got other melee characters, is they now have advantage on attacks against this character. So perhaps you can... I've got Lae'zel equipped here with some pretty cool stuff. So yeah, perhaps I didn't need to stun them, but the stunning actually applied advantage. That really, really helped her there. So kind of a support striker, it's like a surgical strike. The point of the monk is, sure, we've got these guys here, but maybe there's another spellcaster over that side. The monk can use step of, let's just skip through that. Something like step of the wind dash or step of the wind disengage. I can actually make it to the other side of the battlefield and start attacking someone else. Whereas Lae'zel, sure, perhaps she can cast Misty Step, but that's not going to be every turn that she can do that. She can only rarely do that. Whereas the monk can get around very, very quickly. So I'm here at the same fight. This time I've got Way of the Open Hand and I have actually added the right damage. I actually gave this build now a wisdom of 18. I don't want to talk a bit about items. I don't want to give away too much. Perhaps people don't want things spoiled. But one piece of item that is effectively in Act 1 is from the trader outside the Githyanki Kresh, the lady who wants to be part of the Society of Brilliance, sells you the Graceful Cloth, which is completely, I swear, it's made for the monk. So armor class 10. Okay, fine, it's basically some clothes. So increase the dexterity score by 2 to a maximum of 20. Brilliant. I only need to get my dexterity to 18 then to get to the maximum. So I started with a dexterity of 17 and then picked athlete to put up to 18. Plus 1 bonus to dexterity saving throws, and your jump distance is increased by 5 feet. Oh yeah, we also gain Cat's Grace, so you have advantage on dexterity checks. So he's been doing all of my lock picking. He's not an expert in picking locks, but with a dexterity of +5 and a proficiency of +4, especially at this high levels, and guidance, he has automatic advantage on picking locks and pickpocketing. It's very, very easy to pass a lot of these checks. Oh, hello. They decided to fight anyway, cool. So, here we're in the same position, but this time, with the open hands, going to try and topple him first. Because if that had worked, I would have had advantage on the next attack. But that's okay. Let's use Stunning Strike. Didn't work. It's not guaranteed to work. Such as that. Didn't work. But at the end of the day, I still did like 52 damage. It's not the highest amount of damage, but that's consistent damage. Going to be able to do that. Now, what weapon am I using? Currently using Soluna's Spear of the Night for a couple of reasons. One, I am proficient with them, with spears, all monks are, so we can use my dexterity. And secondly, kind of important, it's a +3 weapon. I would generally advise pick a weapon that has the highest weapon enchantment, so your chance to hit is higher. Other weapons I did use throughout the game, I haven't actually used Staff of the Ram yet. I picked it up in Act 3. I think that would be a good choice. It's only +2, but we can actually knock people back and stun them. Oh, I didn't bring it in my bag. But Morning Frost is good. Corellin's Grace you get from Act 1 is also good. They could last quite a long time. But I would advise pick a weapon that you are proficient with and you like the effects of. So maybe you want Cacophony, gives you Thunderous Smite. Maybe you really like Thunderous Smite and you think you're going to get a good use out of it. Then pick it. Or Staff of Interruption here gives you level 5 counterspell. Awesome. There are plenty of quarterstaves and spears, and even like there's a dagger here that gives you whole person. It does amazing damage. It's a +2 weapon. There's plenty of choice for monks. As for boots, there are several boots that increase your jump distance. These here, the Bone Spike boots, also give me a +1 bonus to armor class and saving throws. Pretty awesome. And there's Brutal Leap. This action over here, or bonus action over here, can knock people prone. Really, really good. Takes a bonus action, and monks have loads of choices for bonus actions. For cloaks, there aren't a huge number of cloaks in the game. Some of them are in my chest or actually equipped by other characters right now. The Cloak of Displacement would be very good. You get it towards the end of the game also. So at the beginning of the turn, enemies have disadvantages on attack rolls, which is awesome, a bit like Blur. This one got very early on, Cloak of Protection, good for any character, +1 armor class, +1 saving throws. Never a bad choice. This one I've got, when someone hits him, they take 1d4 acid damage, which comes in more useful than it might sound. For his necklace, I've equipped him with the Face Semblance Amulet, so advantage on saving throw, a bit like what a gnome gets. Unfortunately, I'd say there aren't a huge number of necklaces that go very well with monks, apart from the Sentient Amulet, which you get from Grimforge, because it gives you the chance to get some key points back and cast Shatter. I had this on for a very long time, actually during the game. Also, it's very fitting, very thematic. It's kind of the monk amulet. Otherwise, a lot of the necklaces actually have spells equipped to them. And the downside here is, sure, I could cast Gust of Wind, but then I'm not getting access to my Stunning Strike, which is what I really, really want. For rings, there are a few rings that are made for melee characters, not monks specifically. It's this one, the Caustic Band I picked up a long time ago. Your weapon attacks deal 2 acid damage. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply to unarmed attacks, but it does apply to attacks if you are using an actual weapon. We can get a Ring of Regeneration. That comes from Act 3, so it gives you hit points at the start of every turn, which is probably needed because monks don't have a huge number of hit points. We can see at the side I've actually got second lowest hit points out in my party at the moment. So quite a few of the rings actually give benefits when you cast a spell or cantrip, which monks aren't doing, so we can't really use those particularly well. Some of them just give an extra spell, like jump here. I had this one equipped for quite some time because jump on a monk would be really good because you can jump very, very far. Other rings just give resistances, which are always going to be nice for any character. Anyway, this one I've got on currently. When you kill a creature, your next attack roll will be a critical hit. Once spent, this effect refreshes after a long rest, so you can use this and then just switch out after the first time you do it. Way to guarantee critical hits. So monks don't generally do well at area of effect damage, but I want to show the key resonance in action now in a fight. So let's have key resonance punch. Thankfully got a very high chance to hit. That one's resonating key. They all need to be quite close together. Let's actually get this one as well. And then use our offhand attack against this one. Yeah, I'm going to take opportunity attacks. I'm basically hoping it's going to be fine. And for the sake of this video, it's going to be fine. Oh, okay. I'll do that. That saves me having to do that to that method then. So let's then use the bonus action against this one. Ah, it's just because I killed it. Right, okay. I didn't expect to do kill all those, but let's just try these two now. It might have been better if I actually had tagged this grease ball over here, but we did some area of effect damage. It's not as high as other classes, but it is always available to you. And lastly, we come to wear the 4 elements. So I think an obvious choice here, because there's so many enemies close by. I know the grease is going to set light, whatever. Alright, that's been a great start, alright? I can cast it again. Seems awesome. But I'm already down 8 key points in the first round, well, I guess 2 rounds of combat. And I might still want to use Flurry of Blows, to be honest. It's a very common thing for monks to do. And that's kind of what I don't like about the Wear the 4 Elements monk. It's kind of twofold. Is first of all, our key points get drained a lot more quickly, which means I might not last the whole battle. And secondly, if I'm using Flames of the Phoenix, awesome for damage, it means I'm not trying to stun people. And I had a battle against Gortash, and in the whole battle, he had 1, maybe 2 turns in combat because my monk was stunning every single time. And it worked. Whereas here now, the wizard is... Whoa, we're blowing up. The wizard is going to have a chance to do something, which is what you don't want. Action economy is king. If you can stop people from having an action, then you're going to win. I would admit, with this many enemies, you want to try and get rid of as many of them as quickly as possible. But that's what a wizard is for. It's out of the 3 subclasses. My personal favourite is Wear the Open Hand, because of the extra bonuses we get to the offhand attacks, the unarmed strikes. We get to add extra damage to our unarmed strikes, and we get the key resonance. So we get to do lots of damage and AoE damage. And we do get to help with things like topple and shove and stopping enemies having reactions. For me, the next best subclass for me is the Way of the Shadow. It's really good. It's really close between Wear the Shadow and Wear the Open Hand. It's not like, for me, Wear the Open Hand very much outclasses Wear the Shadow. Wear the Shadow is really, really good at exploring. They can hide with a bonus action, teleporting around, creating darkness. Maybe they don't do as much consistent damage. They've still got that attack that does extra psychic damage. And Wear the 4 Elements, the thing is, Wear the 4 Elements gives you a lot more versatility. You can do lots of different things with Wear the 4 Elements that you can't really do with the other monks, because they get to choose their spells. Now, just because I prefer Wear the Open Hand doesn't mean you can't like Wear the 4 Elements. You should play what you find most fun. That's what every character should probably be about first. And if you find being min-max, going for maximum strength fun, then do that. That's what you should be aiming for. See, I was going to go and do the resonating key, but I can't. Sure, I could use Flames of the Phoenix right now. Then that's all my key points gone. That's not a good look. Even going to the summit. Shatter. There's 3 key points. Then I'm nearly out. So at this point, I'm probably not going to cast any more spells, because I'm worried I'm going to run out of key points. Instead, I'm just going to start doing this, which is what Wear the Open Hand does, but better. So I'm quite glad I didn't cast Fireball. I took these two out. Now the last thing I want to talk about are the Illithid powers, if you want to use Illithid powers for your monk. Maybe you don't, in which case you could ignore this part of the video, obviously. Now there aren't any monk specific or class specific powers. All of these can be used by all classes. So it's more kind of, is this useful for a melee character or a caster or any character? This one here I think is always useful. The first attack roll or ability check gains a bonus equal to your proficiency bonus. Favourable beginnings. Very nice for characters in and outside of combat. Forced tunnel helps you get around. Probably don't really need this for a monk, but we need it to unlock these other ones further out. It doesn't provoke opportunity attacks, but we can do that quite easily as a monk anyway. Repulsor, I think this is nice to be able to push people back, and it's an area of effect. It's not really about the damage, it's more about the pushing, but with quite a few of these Illithid powers, this uses an action, so you've got to weigh up the option. Is this better than 2 melee attacks, including using Stunning Strike? This Displace kind of works quite well with the Repulsor. Enemies take an extra 1d8 psychic damage if they take full damage. It's not a lot of damage considering how much damage they take when falling. Black Hole, I'll show you this. To create a point of intense gravity that pulls in all nearby enemies and possibly slows them. That's going to be good for grouping enemies up together, for your wizards perhaps. Sonic Dominance, this is effectively a Dispel Magic. Right, when an enemy within 60 feet targets you, has to be you though, with a spell of that level, that is lower or equal to your proficiency bonus. Our proficiency bonus is 4 plus 4, so we can dispel any, or we can counterspell any spell that's level 4 or lower. And it's a reaction as well, which is really nice because we don't always have lots of reactions as a monk. Fly, we can fly, awesome, good for any class. Concentrated Blast, we don't need this, but we do need it to unlock these other abilities. Sonic Backlash gives you the chance to do some psychic damage if you can't stop it with Sonic Dominance. It's kind of nice. I gave it to Gale on my playthrough, he's been using it quite often, but as a reaction actually with wizards, you might want to use shield instead or counterspell. Anyway, Call the Weak, this is really powerful. I've shown this in another video, but when you bring a creature down to fewer hit points than your number of evolved Illithid powers. So, my Tav here has 18 hit points. If I get an enemy to fewer than 18 hit points, they die. And they do extra damage to those around them, which can basically set off a chain reaction if enemies are at low enough hit points. I think this is really, really good if you've got a lot of Illithid powers. If you've only got like 3 or 4, not really worth it. If you're filling it in brain with Tadpoles, definitely worth it. Mind Blast, awesome. Gives us an AoE action to AoE damage with the monk, which we wouldn't otherwise have. Mind Sanctuary, amazing. Sculpt a magical nexus that allows those within to take actions and bonus actions. There's actually a small area. It's not even just the monk, it's anyone nearby. It's so strong. Instead of using a bonus action for Flurry of Blows, you can just do extra attacks. Get more stunning strikes in. Absolutely amazing. Look at the firearms. This is what's been showing up a lot of the time in my videos so far. So when you make a successful attack roll, you can change it into a critical hit. This is only once per long rest, so you've got to choose it wisely, but it does mean you can choose when you get a critical hit. And Ability Drain, this is really strong as well. Only once per turn, kind of sadly. When you make an attack roll, the creature reduces that target's corresponding ability by 1. So as a monk, that would be reducing the dexterity by 1, which can bring the armor class down by 1. It's not a huge thing, but it's a nice passive bonus that we don't even have to think about. I've got one more Tadpole. I think Stage Fright generally is quite a strong, powerful ability as well. So your targets have disadvantage if they fail their wisdom saving throw. They have disadvantage on attack rolls, and they take 2d6 psychic damage when they miss, and they've got disadvantage, so they're quite likely to miss. So it's really good for doing almost like damage over time. It's on the enemy's turn, which is always nice. I probably wouldn't want to turn into a Displacer Beast. Fracture Psyche isn't that good, because we can only target one enemy at a time. It's an intelligence save, which is generally quite a good save to target. Then we can cast Shatter Psyche if an enemy dies while they have their Psyche fractured, and that armor class is reduced by 2. But these require actions. I'd rather just be stunning enemies, or trying to, at least, or attacking them. I'd say it's not worth wasting a Tadpole or an action using. Illithid Expertise, I mean, it might actually be a good idea. You get Persuasion, Deception, and Intimidation checks, expertise, which, again, as a monk, you might not have just one way to make up for it. Free cast we don't need, because we don't okay, I suppose you could take away the key cost of something, but it's not that useful. I'd much rather have this on a caster. So I'm going to use this. Luck of the Firearms keeps coming up. Let's have a critical hit just to start with. So I want to show you Mind Sanctuary, which lets you create an area which will affect enemies. So that uses my action, but even though these are grayed out, I can actually use my bonus action now to cast all of these. So let's use Black Hole. Should start dragging the enemies towards it. If they fail, there we are. Now the monk is out of actions and bonus actions, but they've been grouped up together. So let's say Shadowheart or Gale, let's use Shadowheart. She has got Flame Strike. And then let's use Gale. You can use, I don't know, Lightning Bolt. And we've just taken out half of all the enemies left. In fact, we've taken out loads of them. Now I've come back to this position. I'm going to use Mind Blast again. The ones at the back are just out of range, but we can see quite a few of them are in range. And this is easily worth a use for a monk. Because look, we've stunned 4 creatures, which we couldn't actually do as a monk ourselves anyway. And now that they are stunned, we get advantage against them. All attacks. That 1d4 psychic damage was from that Colour of the Weak Tadpole ability. Because this one came below 18, well maybe 19 hit points now that I gave him one more edited power. And I can fly. That's just awesome. That might actually save me from having to use a key point. That brings me towards the end of the video. Hopefully you learned something about the monk that maybe you didn't know before. And I'm also hoping that I've given you a few tools to use for yourself to make some builds that you want, include the type of monk that you want to make that you find enjoyable. I've got to say, I was very happy that I picked a monk as my first playthrough. It has been everything I wanted it to be and more. Pretty much keep up with most of the other melee classes, but they have the ability to strike any part of the battlefield, which other classes can't really do so well. And also the stunning strike is absolutely amazing. So let me know what you think of the monk. Is there anything I missed out that you wish I'd included? I'm sure if I made any mistakes, you'll let me know. If you made it this far, please do consider subscribing. Thank you very much to the members of my channel. You really do help support it. And hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.